Hello, everybody. Welcome to Lecture 3 in Marine and Aquatic Ecology, where we will be talking about evolution of mating systems and social behavior, focusing on animals in the marine environment. All right, so we'll turn first to animal mating systems, and we're focusing on the interface between organisms and one portion of their environment, namely their potential mating partners of the opposite sex and their competitors of the same sex. So remember the distinction between natural selection and sexual selection. You can compete against everybody for resources under natural selection, but generally, sexual selection will be competition only within the same sex. And we're still at the organism level of study, asking why organisms are the way they are, and attempting to answer that question using Darwin's model of fitness and his conceptual model of natural selection and also sexual selection. So we're in the subfield of behavioral ecology under the organism's level of organization. And we're looking at the mating system. And we're in the subfield of behavioral ecology, which looks at the evolution of different types of behaviors in response to the environment. And we're considering the social environment here. So, what is the mating system? Let's define it. Simply the pattern of matings between females and males. And a reminder the female and male function can be together and functional inside a single individual, a hermaphroditic individual. So, it's possible to be a female and a male at the same time if the individual we're talking about is a hermaphrodite. Okay, so the mating system has two components, and these two are number one, the number of mates that an individual has during one season or over its lifespan. And that number of mates can be simultaneous or sequential. And the second component of the mating system is the strength of the bonds between mating pairs. Sometimes the bonds are very weak, sometimes they're very strong. So those are the two components. And those two components have many implications regarding competition and sexual selection. All right, so last time we left off with Bateman's principle, which is sort of the starting point in understanding mating systems and how to make sense out of them in terms of sexual selection. And this idea is that female reproductive success is typically limited by resources, whereas male reproductive success is typically limited by access to mates or access to females. And so if you're male, you have the potential for essentially infinite mating success, infinite reproductive fitness if you can have access to, for example, nearly all the females in the population. Then you're the only father of the next generation, so your fitness is essentially infinite. Whereas females don't have that opportunity in general because they're not limited by access to mates, they're limited by access to resources. So when females compete against each other during sexual selection, they usually are predicted to be competing primarily for resources, which is the same sort of competition caused by natural selection, competition for resources. But when males compete against other males during sexual selection, that competition is usually for mates. And the stakes are huge. The stakes can be very high because the winner can basically take away everything. So this is why Darwin saw sexual selection primarily in terms of male competition and not so much female competition, because female competition would be very similar to natural selection. While male sexual selection is going to be quite different from natural selection. It can work in opposite direction from natural selection because the stakes are so high and the possibility of winning the lottery is a huge fitness advantage. All right, so we have this basic sexual asymmetry, and it's usually in this direction, but sometimes it's in the opposite direction. But in most species, females invest more in each mating, so they don't usually benefit with multiple matings, and so they often are more selective in who they choose to mate with. Males is just the reverse. They invest little in each mating. They can benefit with by mating with multiple females, and so they compete for mating opportunities, and the payoff can be very large. And there's also the sexual asymmetry in determining parenthood. So males are usually the sex that can't determine whether they're the parent for absolute certain of any particular offspring, so they can be tricked into caring for an offspring that's not theirs. Of course, in females, that's less likely, but it is possible. You know, females that lay eggs can be tricked into brooding and feeding offspring that were not there, if there's been an egg switch. So that is possible, but usually it's the males that develop behaviors that can be explained by the fact that they cannot determine whether they are the actual parent of any particular offspring for certain. And a quick reminder here: natural selection, competition for resources among all individuals, regardless of their sex. Sexual selection is due to competition for mates within a sex, and also possibly competition for resources within a sex if your mating success is limited by resources. So the basic theory is, if you're the sex with a high investment, you should evolve to be more selective in mate choice. If you're the sex with low investment, then you're going to be competing much more intensively for mates, and you are a target of sexual selection, which can conflict with natural selection, and also you'll often evolve secondary sex characters that are associated with that competition, such as larger size, bright, showy colors and displays, mating, aggression, dancing displays. And that's because these secondary sex characters can have a huge payoff if they are actually effective in the mate competition. Right, well, females usually invest more energy and resources in gametes, eggs, than males in sperm. It is physically possible, nevertheless, for both males and females to care for their offspring, and the degree of care varies greatly among species. The relative amount of effort expended by mom versus dad in offspring care turns out to be highly correlated with the mating system, as you'd predict from sexual selection theory. So we can arrange animal mating systems along two axes here of parental investment or parental care to the offspring. These are the total amount of energy and resources devoted by each parental sex, to the fitness of their offspring. So this includes both before and after the birth of their offspring. All right, and where you sit on these two axes often is a good predictor of what type of mating system is occurring in the species. So promiscuity here on the lower left is by far the most common situation in nature, since most species invest very little in their offspring. Promiscuity is the existence of more than one mate for both males and females, with little or no strength at all of the pair bond. So if mating is cheap for both sexes, then neither sex has much preference, and so mates largely indiscriminately, and that's comes straight out of sexual selection theory. That's the prediction. And that's how usually we understand promiscuity and its evolution. So promiscuity is universal in outcrossing plants, including seagrasses, and occurs in most animals, as for example invertebrates who release their gametes into the water column. And about 70% of all marine invertebrates are free spawners, releasing their gametes into the water. And the density of water allows this strategy, as buoyancy allows the gametes to remain in the water column indefinitely long, which increases the chances that sperm and eggs will find each other and fuse in syngamy to form a zygote, which then develops into a larva that may or may not feed in the water column. All right, here's a nice David Attenborough video on free spawners.
Produce sexually, but being fixed to the seabed, they can't move to find a mate. Somehow they must synchronize their sexual activity, and they do so using the rising water temperatures of spring and the phases of the moon. A few days after the full moon, in late spring, when tidal currents are at their weakest, the corals of the Great Barrier Reef are ready to spawn. Some corals are male and release clouds of sperm. Nearby, a female will be releasing eggs. Other species of coral are both male and female. These release packages of eggs already pre-wrapped in sperm. Bundles of eggs and sperm float to the surface to mix with others from further along the reef. Each kind of coral times its release to a certain hour on a certain night. That maximizes the chances of cross-fertilization. The fertilized eggs drift away from the reef.
Also good to keep in mind that whenever we're talking about mating systems, we're talking about not just males and females, but hermaphrodites also in the mating system somehow, so it can get a bit complicated. So in the case of hermaphroditic corals, as we saw in the video, they often release little packages of eggs or sperm into the water column. In any particular year or season, they could be male or female or both. And that opens up the possibility of self-fertilization as well. If your eggs that you produced happen to meet sperm in the water column that you also produced, the coral also produced. So that, in fact, is considered to be an adaptation, because often you don't find genetically different mates nearby the colony. So the only possibility of reproduction is going to be self-fertilization. And remember, that's one of the hypotheses for the evolution of hermaphroditism and evolutionary maintenance of hermaphroditism is the idea of reproductive assurance. So promiscuity is probably the most common mating system in marine invertebrates, especially the 70% that are free spawners. But promiscuity is not common in birds because the young need to be cared for, at least until they're capable of flying. So flight requires some care and some investment of energy and time into those young before they're able to fly. And so, therefore, for at least a female, parental investment is usually fairly high. Sometimes, most of the time, it's the female, but sometimes it's the male. So, at least one of the sex has a high investment and doesn't really benefit much by multiple matings. And so promiscuity is less common in birds just because of the flight function that requires an investment by the parent. However, in a few species of birds, this is not the case. In species that don't have a need to fly immediately, and often don't fly but rather run to get around, these species are often promiscuous maters. For example, some shorebird species. If the young are precocious, they can leave the nest very soon after hatching and can survive on their own, so neither parent really invests very much after hatching. And males in some of these species court females communally in special areas of the habitat where females are likely to be passing by. And these communal areas are called leks, Leks. And not just in birds, but in other animals as well. Frogs, bats, fish, and some seals also choose their mates in these communal leks. And leks form apparently because several males are more conspicuous than one. However, males in leks often have a dominance hierarchy, and the females usually prefer to mate with the more dominant male, so maybe they can distinguish those better when they're displaying with a bunch of other males together and can be observed together. So this means that less dominant males, though, can show up often at a lek and sneak fertilizations as females are trying to approach dominant males. And this does happen because often there's a lot of commotion in leks and a lot of chaotic behavior. So sometimes, animals forget who's who, and so this can be possible. In ruffs, which is a shorebird, um, recent research in Nature in 1995 has shown interesting details of male behavior in leks. So, for example, males of low status, they benefit more from more commotion, so they try to entice nearby males to enter the lek even after it's very large. Males of high status, though, benefit from smaller leks, and they usually stop enticing other males to come in after the lek reaches an intermediate size. So males of high status occupy the best spot in the lek where females can most easily approach them. So you can get this enticing behavior that's rank dependent. So there's a lot going on here, and lots of interesting behavior, complex behavior going on in these leks, and it's fairly easy to study using videographic methods. So here's a lek of ruffs in Norway, and you can see the females right here, just minding their own business, doing a little foraging with the males, displaying nearby, displaying their neck feathers. There are three females right here. So things are heating up a little bit, or the males are displaying and also fighting each other aggressively as part of the display. And among terrestrial species, leks also occur in many frogs. So the croaking at night that you hear is usually males broadcasting in leks, and also colonial nesting bats, and of course, some species in the grouse family. Lekking also occurs in the harbor seal, Phoca vitulina, apparently because this is one of the few species of pinnipeds. Remember seals, sea lions, and walruses. One of the few species that does not mate on islands, rather they mate in the water. So it's difficult for males to dominate females and control a harem underwater. So that may be the reason they mate promiscuously in leks. So harbor seal, and they often haul out these large groups, warm up on land between feeding bouts. So in harbor seals, males display underwater along the shores of popular beaches where females haul out and where females are likely to be swimming. In this one study, males were fitted with GPS collars that showed that they congregated along beaches where females were abundantly hauled out. So the females here are the black dots, and the males with the GPS collars are the polygons showing their movement. And most males congregate around where the black dots are, which are where the females are. And so they displayed with sort of bubble blowing vocalizations. They vocalized underwater and blew bubbles at the same time. And males are aggressive towards other males within the leks. So here's the bubble blowing vocalization here of a male displaying in shallow water next to where the females are hanging out on the beach. So the females are out on the beach sunbathing, the males are in the water calling and making their displays, trying to attract the attention of the females, who then come in some cases, and decide to mate with some of the males. And a male may mate with multiple females during these lek displays, and a female may mate with multiple males also during the lek display. Some triggerfish females, Odonis niger, seem to display to males in groups resembling leks, but it's not quite clear if these perform the same mate selection function as leks in other species. So there's still a lot of questions that are unanswered here. So here's a group of females equally spaced from each other, roughly, sort of communally displaying. It seems like a lek, just exactly the same sort of lek that males would form to attract females, but here females are doing it. It looks like they're attracting males, but it's not really clear for sure what's going on here. It's very interesting behavior, though, deserving of more study. Right, as female investment in offspring increases while male investment is low, then the mating system polygyny tends to result. That's the way I pronounce it, and most people I know pronounce it, although I guess some people pronounce it polygyny. It just means many females. So this is a mating system of several females mating with one single given male. So one male mates with several females. While each female herself will usually mate with only one or a small number of males. And since the sex ratio is always 1-to-1, this means that many males will not mate at all. And these are usually younger subordinate males who will hang out, range around the periphery of the mating areas, and occasionally try their hand in challenging the dominant males. And they usually lose, but sometimes they win, and so a new dominant male will come in. So in polygyny, there's often intense competition between males for mates, and this is the example that Darwin had in mind when he was defining sexual selection. And so as a result, males are often bigger than females, have armor used for fighting, like horns and antlers. Elephant seals have trunks, for example. Marine examples are sea lions and some seals, including the elephant seal. And the fighting could be so vicious and violent that extreme sexual dimorphism has resulted. Males are roughly 4 times the size of females, and they have the trunk that acts as a resonating chamber that amplifies their enraged bellowing, which intimidates the younger males. So it sounds like they're bigger, tougher than maybe they actually are when they use that trunk to make their mating calls. And there are also many shorebirds and fish that are polygynous. And for example, the pufferfish. So elephant seals represent basically the quintessential example of Bateman's principle. Right, most sea lions have this polygynous mating system in which one or a few males can dominate a large number of females simply by being physically aggressive and stronger than most of the other males, because then you can keep those males off the beach, because the mating habitat is a small island, a small section of shoreline. If you can physically keep other males away, then that's a huge selective advantage in terms of passing your genes on to the next population. And so the polygynous mating system is maintained by this aggressive fighting behavior in males in this case. And the male-male competition is expressed in terms of this aggressive fighting, violent fighting behavior. But in other cases, the male-male competition for mates is much more subtle, and it involves displays towards the females that are not aggressive at all.
Unfortunately, this small Japanese pufferfish is dull, almost to the point of invisibility. But to compensate, he is probably nature's greatest artist. To grab a female's attention, he creates something that almost defies belief. His only tools are his fins. In his head, a plan of mathematical perfection. He ploughs the sand, breaking it up into the finest of particles. These shells aren't just rubbish to be removed. He uses them to decorate the ridges of his construction. He can't rest for more than a moment, but must work 24 hours a day for a week, or the current will destroy his creation. A final tidy-up, and his masterpiece is complete. Nowhere else in nature does an animal construct something as complex and perfect as this. If this doesn't...
So why does the pufferfish do this? Well, obviously this is not natural selection. This sort of behavior is a big waste of energy as far as natural selection is concerned, as far as um, getting resources is concerned. The only possible explanation for this is sexual selection. So the only possible advantage of doing this is to attract mates, to attract females. And if a male is successful at attracting females, he might be the most popular male in the entire population, and he might end up siring like 90% of the next generation, which is a huge advantage in terms of fitness. A huge competitive advantage over other males that does not involve any kind of aggression or fighting whatsoever. Just careful, peaceful, artistic work. So Bateman's principle is expressed completely differently in the pufferfish than it is in the elephant seal, probably because in the pufferfish you cannot, as a male, control a harem of females out in the open ocean the same way you can on an island, the way the elephant seals do. All right. We have examples of sexual asymmetry that results in selection for male behavior that increases their competitive ability to find mates. So, for example, aggressive fighting behavior in the elephant seal, or display behavior, for example, in the pufferfish. And that behavior evolves because males can increase their fitness basically without limit with those sorts of behaviors, which is not possible in females. Now, another example of male behavior that has evolved because of sexual asymmetries is behavior that's due to the inability of males to determine the paternity of offspring. And an example here in the bluegill sun. So these sneaker males who resemble females can gain a tremendous advantage in mating success with practically no work whatsoever, by virtue of the fact that the legitimate males, the legitimate mates chosen by the females, are not able to recognize that those offspring that they're taking care of are not their own. So uncertainty of paternity presents opportunities for evolution, again, that are asymmetrical. And if you think about it, it's probably not advantageous for females to allow these sneaker males to fertilize their eggs, because they're being fertilized by males that may be genetically inferior because they don't put out the same work as the males that they are mating with and are choosing. So there should be some opportunity for selection against those sneaker males through the female function. So females might evolve some ability to prevent those sneaker males from fertilizing their eggs. So here's an example of that possibility.
Meet the female ocellated wrasse, her mate who has made a nest from algae, and the sneaker male who wants to fertilize her eggs. But the sneaker ocellated wrasse may be disappointed, for the female can influence which males fertilize her eggs, even after they've been spawned into the water, a new study suggests. The research looks at how the female ocellated wrasse can improve the chances of a preferred male sperm fertilizing her eggs. Sneaker males, which tend to be smaller, try to join a nesting male and female with the intention of fertilizing the female's eggs. They don't court females, and nor do they intend to provide parental care. Female ocellated wrasse, on the other hand, prefer nesting males, which build nests, court females, and care for eggs. The ability to choose a mate for egg fertilization was thought to be limited to species with internal fertilization. But this paper shows that the females increase the chances of a preferred mate's sperm over freeloading males to fertilize her eggs even after she's released them into the water. The study, published in Nature Communications, demonstrates that the females can control which sperm fertilizes their eggs by producing an ovarian fluid that surrounds the eggs. The fluid helps nesting males, which produce fewer but faster sperm than sneaker males. Whether a male is a sneaker or a nester depends on early growth differences. Sneaker male behaviour is quite common among insects, fish and mammals, says co-author Suzanne Alonso, a professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz. The way in which females control the chances of a male sperm inseminating her eggs, known as cryptic female choice, has mainly been associated with internal fertilization. But this research now suggests that females can control external fertilization, opening up a completely new line of inquiry. And the researchers add that the study will help understand the impact on the species of variations in habitats, such as climate change.
So this would then be an example of female competition rather than male competition. Female competition for mating success, in which females are competing amongst each other for access for fertilizations with the more higher quality males to avoid fertilization by the sneaky males. So a much more subtle form of competition than is usually observed in the males. All right, so this is all happening within the polygynous mating system. And there are two classes of polygyny, and these are resource defense polygyny. Males defend a resource or territory against other males and mate with whatever females happen to be inside their territory. Females are free to move around at will, but choose to nest usually in the best territories because these contain more resources that they can use to feed their young. So, for example, virtually all polygynous birds and fish, and some fish species, males defend a nest, like we've seen, where several females lay eggs that the male fertilizes, and then the male cares for those eggs, keeps a current of oxygen-rich water flowing over the surfaces of those eggs. And then in female defense polygyny, males move around freely. They do not defend a territory against other males, but control a harem of females. So physically prevent the females from moving too far away, fight other males who approach their harem, and so on. So females are not free to move, but are herded around by the male. Examples are elk and deer and sea lions and most polygynous mammals. And in most polygynous species, the sex ratio is 1-to-1. And usually all females mate, but only a small fraction of males, the most dominant males, actually mate. So there's far greater variation in mating success among males than there is among females, and lots of friction between dominant and bachelor males hanging around in the periphery. So polygyny is the mating system resulting from Bateman's principle, in which the males are the ones who have the potential for unlimited mating success that we discussed last lecture. But conversely, as male investment increases while female investment remains low, you get the reverse situation, which is polyandry. This mating system, however, is extremely rare because it's rare for females to invest little and males a lot. And this is because females already invest more in gametes, eggs. And in most species, females are fitter if they continue investing more after conception and birth. So in birds and mammals, this mating system, polyandry, occurs in some species of shorebirds that mate in the Arctic during a brief and very productive summer. Also in tropical jacanas that mate in productive marshes, and some small monkeys like tamarins and marmosets. So resources are so abundant that mating is cheap for both males and females. And females can produce several clutches of eggs without any difficulty whatsoever because the resources are so abundant. So it's no problem. So they can mate with multiple males. And in some species, both males and females incubate eggs, and females can produce 2 to 3 clutches, per season. Um, and in other species, females have tricked the males into being the only incubator of eggs. In these species, the females lay several clutches and then just leave them for the males to incubate. So polyandry often represents a complete sexual reversal in which females are larger. They defend territories of males and their nests. So it'd be resource defense polyandry. I don't think there are any examples of male defense polyandry. And they sometimes kill the eggs of another female in order to induce her male to copulate again. And the jacana is an example of that. Why polyandry evolved in these cases rather than promiscuity is not really known. Males could presumably have done exactly the same thing the females did, but did not. One possible explanation is that in many shorebirds, females are larger than the males because their energy demands during migration are greater. So they are more dominant. They could just be more dominant and able to coerce males into caring for their offspring because they're bigger. But this is probably not the full explanation because it seems reasonable that if the female's offspring would benefit if she cared for them, then she would evolve to care for them. So it seems that polyandry requires that males are better at rearing young than females in these species for unknown reasons. If that's true, then there might be selection against females to rear young, as the young would be receiving lower quality rearing, possibly. If so, then females would benefit from abandoning the nest, letting the male do the rearing and laying another clutch of eggs instead. So if males are better than females at rearing young, for whatever reason, and if there are abundant resources during mating season, it might benefit females to lay many clutches and just abandon them to their fathers. So, this is kind of an unsatisfying explanation, but still a lot to learn. So here's the number of species with different mating systems in shorebirds. So there's about 11 polygynous species with female care, 199 monogamous species, both parents care for their young, and 17 polyandrous species. So it seems like, at least in shorebirds, polyandry is about as abundant as polygyny, maybe even a little bit more abundant. Something about living and migrating along the shoreline that seems to have favored the evolution of polyandry more than in other groups. Still some mysteries to solve here. So in fishes, the situation is different. In many species, males build and protect a nest. Females choose to lay eggs in a nest after they first inspect the nest and the male protecting it. In this case, males who build attractive nests end up protecting the eggs of many females who like that nest and the male choose to lay their eggs there. And the mating system might be polygyny. However, it is also possible for females to lay eggs at many nest sites of many different males, in which case one female will mate with many males. And this will occur if resources are abundant during the mating system, and it's possible for females to lay many clutches of eggs. And in some fish groups, such as seahorses and pipefishes, the male egg protector role has become more extreme in that the male has evolved a pouch on his own abdomen in which females lay their eggs rather than a nest outside his body. So the male fertilizes those eggs with his sperm and carries them inside the pouch until they hatch. And while in his pouch, he protects and cares for them, providing them with gas exchange, osmoregulation, and waste removal. So in these species, males rather than females are pregnant and give birth to their offspring. There's still a lot of questions that are unanswered here in seahorses and pipefish, but one possible advantage of the pouch is just to ensure paternity. If you've got a pouch protecting the eggs on your own body, you know that there are not going to be any sneaker whales coming in and fertilizing those eggs. They will be all your offspring. In some of these species, the female will lay one clutch of eggs with one male, and the system is monogamous. And in other species, the female will lay several clutches of eggs with several males, and the system is polyandrous. And you can see some of those patterns here in this evolutionary tree made by the Germany group headed by Anthony Wilson. It's not really fully understood why some seahorses and pipefish are monogamous and others are polyandrous. The polyandrous species tend to occur in the temperate zone and the monogamous in the tropics. Also, monogamous species have a less impressive pouch, and one possible explanation of the latitudinal pattern is that food is more abundant during the mating season, during the summer, in the temperate zone, which allows females to lay several clutches of eggs, potentially with several males. And we currently don't really have an explanation of why the pouch is less developed in the monogamous species. But perhaps in monogamous species, there's less concern about paternity. That might be one factor. In any case, because polyandry is extremely rare, it's something of a curiosity and is perhaps better studied than more conventional mating systems, which are, not as curious. Then, with high parental investment in both sexes, monogamy is the usual mating system. So, because both parental investments are high, both parents are often equally selective and gain little or nothing from extra matings. Monogamy is the existence of a strong pair bond between a single male and a single female throughout each mating system. Monogamy includes two different scenarios when all adults have just one mate during the mating period, but a different mate in different seasons, and that's called serial monogamy. Or when all adults have just one mate over their entire life, with exceptions caused only by death, disease, and so on. So in monogamy, there's often equal investment to offspring, but there still remains an important sexual asymmetry, which is paternity. Females know that their offspring are their own, but males often don't know if their offspring are their own. So females can therefore sneak matings with other males, and within a monogamous relationship, they can be reasonably sure that their mate will nevertheless help them raise those young. So there's often some shenanigans going on even in the monogamous mating systems. Males, on the other hand, don't gain in fitness by investing in young that are not their own. So many monogamous males will guard jealously their mates from other males and will fight off other males who show any interest in their mate. So this male-male competition, however, is usually more lax in monogamous species. And the result is that there's little size dimorphism in these species. So a size dimorphism is often an indication of competition. The bigger sex is often the sex where there's strong competition, especially for mates. And if there is no size dimorphism, then the suggestion is that you're more likely to have a monogamous mating system. Birds provide most examples of, well-studied examples of monogamy. This is presumably because both sexes can care for young about equally in birds, and where this is needed and possible, monogamy results. So large birds such as raptors, the young take a long time to reach fledgling size, so they need a high parental investment to get them to that stage. And feeding by both parents may be necessary. So most raptors are predatory birds, owls, hawks, eagles, osprey. are monogamous. Crows and ravens are also monogamous. Also, seabirds. Foraging in the ocean can be difficult, and albatross chicks take a year to reach fledgling size, during which parents may make daily feeding runs with flight distances over several hundred kilometers. And so, in these species, the mating system is monogamy, and the birds will have the same mate year after year. If a mate has proven that he or she is a good mate from previous years, then it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to choose a different mate in the next year. So the birds come back and look for the same mate as they had previously. And that ends up being monogamy over several years period, and which is only broken if a bird happens to die. In mammals, monogamy is rare because both sexes usually cannot care for the young equally, and that's usually because female mammals nurse their young, and males cannot nurse. And why male mammals do not lactate is as yet an unsolved question in evolutionary biology. But because they can't lactate, usually they invest far less in young, and mating systems of mammals are usually either promiscuous or polygynous. So approximately 3 to 5% of mammal species are monogamous. Vast majority are not. All right, next topic, we're going to talk about the polygyny threshold model. Polygyny is, as we discussed, is predicted to evolve in cases where there's a large sex asymmetry in amount of resources invested per mating. And the asymmetry favors males. If males invest far less than females, then they can gain fitness by many matings with many females. If males generally mate with more than one female during the mating season, this mating system is called polygyny. So polygyny can evolve if males guard space, for example, a territory, from other males, so that females that enter the territory are not accessible to other males and become the mating partners of the male guarding the territory. Polygyny can also evolve if males guard a group of females that are not associated with the territory, and they just move with them. And so now we're going to move on to the polygyny threshold model, which shows how polygyny can evolve by territorial defense by a male, and from the point of view of a female choosing a male to mate with. By looking explicitly at the ecological context of animal mating, we can gain some insights into some ecological factors favoring the evolution of polygyny versus monogamy. So we're going to talk about the polygyny threshold model, in which we ask two questions. Should a given female mate with an unmated male or with a male that already has a mate? And how does this decision depend on the quality of the territory defended by males in the population? So we assume two things. Males set up territories in their nesting habitat and defend them from other males. Females choose mates based on the quality of the territories they're able to defend. And so we use this graph here to define the polygyny threshold. So this is a graph of the intrinsic quality of territory versus a female's reproductive success. So here in this figure, the orange circles represent individual territories defended by males. And some territories are of high quality along the x-axis and contain lots of resources that can be used to raise young. And this means the female who mates with these males will have a high reproductive success. Other territories are of low quality and have relatively fewer resources, which means females who mate with these males are expected to have low reproductive success. This bottom curve represents how much the territory quality is reduced after the male mates with one female. So this top curve is the success of the female if she's the only female mating with the male, and this bottom curve is the success of the female if there are two females mated to the male. So the question we ask is, as females start cruising around and checking out the males in their territories, which males should they mate with? The first female that comes in obviously should mate with this male A right here because this is the best territory. And then this bumps the territory down to the lower curve because the territory now contains one female who will be using some of the resources to raise her offspring. The next female should choose territory B, which bumps B down to the lower curve. The next female should choose C and D, etc. So this is the polygyny threshold, the territory quality below which it pays females to mate with already mated males. So the next female coming in should not mate with E because that territory is lower, quality is lower than the territory of an already mated male. So she should come back into A, even though there's already a female there, and mate with male A. That territory is the best. And then that will push this territory down even farther. And the next one will be B, push B down. And the next one will be E, which pushes E down to here. And the next one will come to C, and so on. So you can just look at these graphs and figure out the sequence of territories that will be chosen by females coming in who have the ability to accurately assess the quality of the territory, whether or not there's another female in the territory. Okay, we can move it down here. Next one is E, C, then F, then G, then E, then H, then F, and so on. So we've got this threshold here that below which you have polygyny evolving. So this is caused by a variation in the habitat quality, the quality of the habitats of the males. If there's sufficiently high variation in that habitat quality, then you get this threshold model where there's a threshold quality below which you will have the evolution of polygyny. So there are some major conclusions from the polygyny threshold model. First, this threshold exists in habitat quality, and below that, the females have a higher fitness if they mate with already mated males than they do with unmated males, and this creates polygyny. So females should mate with unmated males until they reach this threshold, and after they reach the threshold, the females should tend to alternate mating with already mated males and unmated males. And the major experimental support for the polygyny threshold model is the fact that in species, bird species, for example, males with a bigger harem, bigger group of females in their territory, and those males tend to have higher quality territories, while monogamously mated males usually have not as high quality territories. So the territory quality is indicated pretty well by the number of young babies, baby birds fledged per female in the territory. So how does this model help us understand the ecology of polygyny versus monogamy? Well, if all the territories are the same quality, for example, if they're all above the polygyny threshold, then females theoretically will never choose to mate with already mated males if the sex ratio is 1:1. And so, unless males sneak copulations outside the pair bond, each male will mate with a single female. So, in environments in which there's very little variation in habitat quality, all territories should cluster, and species should be monogamous, barring the usual shenanigans that goes on in monogamous species. So, it's all about variation. And this prediction is borne out pretty well in the data. So, for example, seabirds are usually monogamous, and their nest sites are all equal in food provisioning, since food comes from the ocean and not from the nest site. Shorebirds, on the other hand, are often polygynous, as we've seen, and territories defended by males can certainly vary greatly in quality, as the food comes from the territory and not from outside it. Here's an example of a polygynous shorebird. It's the pectoral sandpiper, just territorial. So when the males arrive on the nesting grounds in the far north after migration, they set up territories. And here's a map of the territories at one of the nesting locations. And the filled circles represent males that have a female on their territory, and the open circles represent males that have no female on the territory. And if you plot the population of different groups, you find that non-breeders, there's a large population of non-breeders. So the breeding males population is not as large as the breeding females population. So there's a group of non-breeding males with empty territories. So this is what you'd expect from the polygyny threshold model. You should expect some territorial males that are not successful due to the low quality of their territory, but we don't really know if the quality of the territory is the reason for this. So this would be an interesting species to study if you can find a significant difference between quality of the territory of the breeding males with the non-breeding males. That has yet to be done. All right, that's basically the topic of animal mating systems, mating system evolution. It's a huge topic. Obviously, we've barely scratched the surface, and there's still much to be learned and much still to be discovered. Here's just a table right here listing out different mating systems in different groups of fishes, and all of the four quadrants of the diagram are represented here. We have promiscuous, polygamous, both types of polygamy, polygyny, and polyandry, and monogamous mating systems represented in the fishes. Most of these are unstudied other than just observing what the mating system is. So there's plenty of research that is ongoing trying to get at the selective advantages of these different systems and different groups and how they're related to the environment and the relationship between the fish and their environment. So polyandry, for example, seems to be represented only in anemone fishes at the moment in some circumstances. And why is that? And what are the conditions that seem to be promoting that mating system in that group? And keep in mind, there's a layer of complexity in addition to the mating system, and that is the sexual system that's going on at the same time in these fishes. Like, for example, all these mating systems could be happening in hermaphrodites, either simultaneous or sequential hermaphrodites. So that's an added level of complexity that still remains to be fully understood, how these systems evolve in hermaphroditic species as well. So there's plenty of potential for further research and generation of more knowledge about what's going on with mating systems. All right, so now we move to the next topic, which is social behavior in animals, and we're going to talk about altruism and cooperative behavior. So we're still on the subject of organism-environment interaction. We're at the organism level of organization, and we're looking at behavioral ecology, that subfield. But now the environment is being construed as the immediate social environment of same species individuals. Since mate-mate interactions were covered already in the last topic, we're now restricting our consideration to interactions between organisms and their parents, their offspring, other relatives, and non related population members. And we're asking, how do these interactions affect the individual's fitness? What behavioral traits tend to increase fitness? And what traits tend to decrease fitness? So, when social interactions are common, fitness becomes very difficult to calculate. This is because although we think of fitness as a property of an individual, in many cases it's determined by a long and complex set of social interactions. So, in many species, social interactions affect an individual's food supply. So, we're talking about the struggle for existence. Competition often is improved by cooperation, which sounds kind of contradictory. But individuals can cooperate to find food, and then as a group, they become more competitive against other groups. So, social interactions can affect an individual's food supply, the available habitat, the exposure from predators, and the availability of other individuals to help in raising young. So, an organism's survival and reproduction depends as much on the other members of the population as on the organism itself. And under these conditions, understanding fitness can become problematic because the interests of the individual and the interests of the group become intertwined. And this leads to problems deciding if certain kinds of behaviors are advantageous or not. And also whether you should compete against individuals or whether you should cooperate with them, and which behavior maximizes your fitness. So all of these types of interactions can have a profound effect on your fitness, if you're within a social group. So we talked about mate, and now we're going to talk about the rest of these. So we can ask some questions. So how selfish or altruistic should an individual be? And how can we make altruism quantitative? From the point of view of an individual, selfishness should be favored by natural selection and sexual selection. But if the individual needs the group to survive and reproduce, should altruism be selectively favored? How honest should an individual be? Honesty can be a form of altruism, disadvantageous to an individual. When would this be selectively favored? Is it possible to be selectively favored? And how do the rules of social interaction change depending on characteristics of the individuals interacting? So, the same versus opposite sex, young versus old, parents versus offspring, unrelated individuals, related individuals. Those are the basic questions we're going to look at now for the rest of the topic this week. And today we'll consider just a couple in a little bit more detail. Number one is, how can altruism evolve if it by definition reduces the fitness of the altruistic individual? And number two, can we explain the evolution of altruism quantitatively in a way that will allow quantitative experimental verification? First, let's have some definitions. Two interacting individuals may be categorized as the donor of the behavior and the recipient of the behavior. For example, one individual offers food, the other receives it. The one offering is the donor, the one who receives it is the recipient. Or one individual gives a display and the other sees it. So the displaying individual is the donor, and the one observing it is the recipient. And the critical insight is that this interaction can cause a change in fitness of both the donor and the receiver. Since the change can be positive or negative in the donor and the receiver, there are four categories of social interactions. Those that increase the fitness of both the donor and the receiver are called cooperation. Those that increase the fitness of the donor and decrease that of the receiver are called selfishness. Those that reduce the fitness of the donor and increase the fitness of the receiver are called altruism. And those that reduce the fitness of both the donor and receiver are called spitefulness. At least those are the English words. Your mileage may vary. So which of these interactions should natural selection favor? Well, cooperation should certainly be favored because it increases the fitness of both. So there should be selection on both the donor and the recipient to engage in cooperation because in both cases their fitness is increased, other things being equal. Selfishness should also be common because it increases the fitness of the donor. So it's directly favored by natural selection. Spitefulness presumably cannot evolve by natural selection by definition, since it reduces the fitness of both participants. But, it's always possible that something that resembles spitefulness might evolve and that we've misinterpreted it as spitefulness when it's something else. One might think that altruism similarly could not evolve by natural selection by definition, since it reduces the fitness of the individual performing the behavior. So how could it evolve by natural selection by definition? But there are many examples of apparently altruistic behavior, and many in the marine environment. So, for example, seabirds, sometimes females help each other with brooding eggs. Also, cetaceans, for example, dolphins, help struggling individuals of humans. There's several anecdotes of this where they will swim underneath them and push them to the surface to help them breathe if they see people struggling. That's happened a few times. Also, male-male alliances form in dolphins in which males cooperatively hunt for food, they guard females, and they fight other alliance groups and guard other alliance members. Seals and sea lions have been shown to engage in types of altruistic behavior. Social snapping shrimp, entire castes defend the colony even though they're not reproducing. How can you explain that? Non-reproductive individuals exist and help other individuals within a colony. That seems to be a tremendous altruism. And some fish have alarm calls. Of course, birds do, and mammals as well have alarm calls. And those alarm calls endanger the fish because, when the fish calls out the alarm, it makes the fish conspicuous to predators. You might then go in and see the fish that made the alarm and eat it. So it's disadvantageous for an individual to make an alarm call, even though it helps other individuals in the group. Right? How can these altruistic behaviors, which reduce the fitness of the altruistic individual, evolve by natural selection? For example, how can a class of colonial shrimp that do not reproduce evolve by natural selection? Does it make any sense? The traditional answer to this question is pretty simple, but it's wrong. So traditionally the explanation goes like this: helping behavior may reduce the fitness of the helper, but it increases the overall fitness of the group or the population or the species. So the old interpretation was that it's good for the species, or the hive and social insects, or the colony and squirrels was interpreted as a superorganism. And selection favored not fitter real organisms, but fitter superorganisms. So, for example, a species that is composed of altruists might be less likely to go extinct than one that's composed of selfish individuals. Because in selfish species, you'd expect a few individuals at least to hoard most of the resources. In altruistic species, on the other hand, resources are expected to be distributed more evenly. So during hard times, um, more than a few individuals can survive. And so the population is less likely to go extinct. This explanation is no longer accepted. It's because it doesn't explain why non-altruistic individuals do not spread within the species or the population and just take over immediately because they have a higher fitness than the altruists. Selfish individuals, so theoretically they can spread to 100% or to fixation, it's called, in just a few generations. They have a higher fitness, so the resulting selfish species could be more likely to go extinct, but extinction still would occur on a different time scale, and it could take many thousands of generations to occur. In the meantime, the selfish individuals will take over the population and spread to fixation fairly rapidly. So the real question you have to answer is, why does this second um, evolutionary trajectory occur? Why does this apply to the altruistic species? You have an altruistic species. Why don't selfish individuals appear in these populations, these cheaters? They have a higher fitness because they're selfish. And so why don't they appear and then take over the population the way this happens here? Why does this altruism seem to be a stable trait in some species? And we're talking about crows, Florida scrub jays, building ground squirrels, social insects, snapping shrimp, dolphins, and many other species that exhibit what appears to be altruism. Well, it turns out that there's a very simple explanation that can explain how altruism can evolve by natural selection, even though it reduces the fitness of the donor individual. It sounds impossible, but it's true. A trait can evolve by natural selection even though it reduces the fitness of an individual expressing that trait. All right, so this is a fundamental insight that took a long time for people to figure out. And the person who figured it out is none other than Ronald Fisher, the same person who invented analysis of variance, the F test, F for Fisher. He gave the first mathematical treatment of the idea in 1930, although the basic idea was originally described by Charles Darwin. And John Maynard Smith called this idea kin selection. So the challenge is to explain behavior that reduces the fitness of the individual performing it while increasing the fitness of other individuals. How can such behavior evolve by natural selection on individuals? Well, if we define fitness as the ability of an individual to leave descendants, then by definition, altruistic behavior cannot evolve by natural selection that increases that fitness. But is this the correct definition of fitness? It turns out that this is not really the correct definition of fitness because it doesn't capture the change in the frequency of a gene necessarily. It works in a great variety of situations, but it does not work in many cases in which organisms interact with each other to alter each other's fitness. So here's why. Evolution is a change in the genetic makeup of a population. If one allele at a locus, at a genetic locus, is favored over another allele at a genetic locus by natural selection, that allele is likely to increase in frequency. How does this happen? Well, that increase occurs because the allele causes the individual to behave in a way that increases the rate of increase of the allele. So let's say this allele causes altruistic behavior in the individual carrying it. It's an altruism allele. So now our question becomes, how can altruistic behavior increase the rate of spread of the altruism allele? Well, the only way that this can happen is if the altruism benefits the allele in some way. So how does altruism create this benefit? Well, altruism by definition involves a benefit. It benefits the individual receiving the behavior. This is the only benefit that occurs in altruism. Therefore, this must be the benefit that causes the increase in frequency of the altruism allele. How can this benefit cause increase in the frequency of the altruism allele? Well, if the receiver of the altruism contains the allele, so if the receiver itself has the allele, then the receiver benefits, passes on more descendants, and passes on its allele at a greater rate. So the best possible case would be the donor and the receiver are identical twins. Assuming they're twins, then the receiver always carries the allele. So we have an allele that causes altruism. How will it increase in frequency? Well, only if it receives a net benefit. So let's calculate the net benefit. Okay, so you have, for example, identical twins. So if you're identical twins, then both will have the altruism allele, or they both will not have the allele. But if they have the allele, then you'll have one of them will be the donor and the other one can be the recipient. And there's going to be a cost to the donor, and that's represented by this bar. And there's going to be a benefit to the recipient, and that's represented by this positive bar. And so the gross benefit to the allele will be this positive bar, and the net benefit to the allele will be the gross benefit minus the gross cost, which is, the benefit minus the cost. So altruism will evolve if the benefit to the allele is greater than the cost. So if the benefit is greater than the cost, or the cost-benefit ratio is less than 1 in the case of identical twins. Simple condition. Then altruism will evolve. So if the donor always is altruistic towards another identical twin, but not to anybody else, then this altruism in which the donor is altruistic towards this identical twin will evolve by natural selection. So there you go. That's how it can happen. Okay, here's a case where the altruist is only altruistic towards its full sibs, like brothers and sisters. So now the probability that two individuals share the allele is 1/2. So here the cost to the donor is the same, The benefit to the recipient is the same, but that benefit is going to be cut in half and shared between each of the two possibilities, whether the recipient has the allele or doesn't have the allele, because half the SIBs will have it and half of it won't have it. So some of that cost or that benefit is wasted. So half the benefit is going to be wasted. So the gross benefit to the allele is this right here, and it's less than the cost to the donor, which is the cost to the allele. So in this case, altruism does not evolve because the cost is not smaller than the benefit. So what if the cost to the donor is exactly half the benefit to the recipient? And that half, this double benefit, is half of that is wasted on recipients that don't have the allele, because half of your SIBs actually don't have the allele by chance. So this is the gross benefit to the allele right here. And now you can say altruism evolves if the gross benefit is greater than twice the cost to make up for this half the SIBs that don't have it. And so if the cost benefit ratio is less than 0.5, which is equal to R, the relatedness between the SIBs, then the altruism will evolve. Now, if we have distantly related individuals, the probability that the recipients contain the allele is 1 over some large number n. The cost of the donor is the same. And if the benefit to the recipient is large enough to make up for the fact that only 1 over n of these individuals are likely to have the allele, the benefit is quite high, then you might have a high enough gross benefit to the allele so the cost-benefit ratio is favorable to the evolution. And so it would have to be less than 1 over n, or R. So to sort of summarize here with a diagram, you have an altruism allele, and that altruism allele can be either in the donor or the recipient, and they're related by R, the coefficient of relatedness. Okay, so there's a gross cost and benefit to the donor and the recipient. To the allele, that cost is going to be the same because the individual donor always has the allele, but the recipient does not always have the allele. It's going to be, so the benefit to the allele is going to be the gross benefit times the probability R that the recipient has the allele. So the net benefit is going to be the gross benefit, B times R, minus the gross cost, which is called the inclusive fitness. So the inclusive fitness incorporates the relatedness between the individuals that are interacting. And if this inclusive fitness is greater than 0, or if B times R is greater than C, or if the ratio of cost to benefit is less than R, the coefficient of relatedness, then altruism can evolve by kin selection. This is called kin selection. You have to take into account the relatedness of individuals who are interacting to understand whether this behavior will evolve by natural selection. So the general relationship, evolution of altruism, occurs when the cost-benefit ratio is less than the coefficient of relatedness. And you can turn this around and say that the evolution of selfishness also doesn't occur automatically. It depends on the cost to the individual recipient of the selfishness. If the recipient is related to the selfish individual, then the cost is going to be experienced in part by the selfishness allele in the recipient. So, if you're interacting with family members, then that places a limit on the amount of selfishness that is capable of evolving. And it's also determined by the relatedness. So selfishness can evolve as the cost-benefit ratio of the selfishness is less than 1 over the coefficient of relatedness between the two individuals interacting. All right, so in summary, if it's a net advantage to the allele causing altruism, then altruism can evolve. It can be a net advantage if the altruist behaves altruistically only to individuals it is related to. Then it's giving a benefit to individuals that also might be carrying the altruism allele because they're related to the altruist. So although Darwin pointed this out sort of intuitively, Ronald Fisher first wrote down the math and figured out if the cost divided by benefit is less than the coefficient of relatedness, then there's a net benefit to the allele, and the altruism allele will increase in the population. So C is the cost to the altruist individual, B is the benefit to the recipient, and R is the coefficient of relatedness between the two individuals. So the net benefit to the allele is simply the gross benefit to the allele, which is B times R, minus the gross cost to the allele, which is C, or B times R minus C. And this is also called the inclusive fitness of the altruism allele. So the net benefit to an allele causing selfishness is calculated similarly. It's B minus CR. This is the inclusive fitness of the selfishness allele. And if this is positive, then the selfishness itself will evolve by natural selection under these conditions. The cost-benefit ratio has to be less than 1 over R. Right, so it's just a simple mathematical relationship here. So the basic conclusion of all this is, number one, that relatedness between two interacting individuals makes altruism easier to evolve, and in fact possible to evolve. And number two, relatedness makes selfishness more difficult to evolve if the two individuals are related to each other. So interactions between related individuals are predicted to be more positive and cooperative than the interactions between unrelated individuals. And the amount of positive altruistic behavior among related individuals should be greater the more closely related they are. That's the basic assumption if you assume that behavior evolves by natural selection, or actually kin selection, affecting the alleles that are responsible for the behavior. So now this gives us an explanation for the evolution of altruism by natural selection. There's no paradox because our definition of fitness was not correct. It was not made from the point of view of the gene. It was made from the point of view of the individual. The gene is what we should be focusing on, since by definition, evolution is change in the genetic makeup of a population. So this gives us a new definition of fitness called inclusive fitness, and our old definition we call Darwinian fitness. Similarly, we can distinguish between Darwinian selection and kin selection. Darwinian selection is natural selection which does not involve interaction between related individuals. So the agent of selection here is either unrelated individuals or any other biotic or abiotic component of the environment. Kin selection, on the other hand, is natural selection on an interaction between related individuals. All right, I can't resist showing you a quote of Darwin, who basically is the first person that we know of who came up with this idea, although he didn't work out the math because he didn't know anything about genetics. So here's him providing an explanation for how a sterile cast in social insects like a honeybee could evolve. Sterile females can evolve by natural selection. That's basically altruism. You're giving up your ability to reproduce for the benefit of other individuals in the hive. So that's pretty extreme altruism. He's saying this can evolve because by natural selection if it benefits the parents who produced that sterile caste. So those individuals in the sterile caste do not benefit, but the parents who are related to those individuals do benefit. So the allele that produced those individuals does benefit because it benefits the parents. Okay, because those individuals achieve a fitness gain for the parents who produced them. All right, so he's saying that family selection within families of related individuals can cause something that appears to be have zero fitness, namely sterility, to evolve by natural selection. So he's basically describing what we now call kin selection. So, as with most things related to biology and ecology, the idea first originated with Charles Darwin, and later people popularized it. So, R.A. Fisher worked out the math. W.D. Hamilton also popularized that idea. And John Maynard Smith, as far as we know, is the person who first coined the word kin selection and compared it to Darwinian selection. So, within this single book written by Charles Darwin, Origin of Species, in 1859, we have three revolutionary ideas which guide biology now. In 2021, those are natural selection, sexual selection, and what we now call kin selection, all of which were first introduced in Darwin's book. Okay, so we have this beautiful idea, kin selection, to explain the evolution of altruism. Um, what evidence is there favoring the idea that kin selection is responsible? I mean, it's a great idea, but does it actually apply in nature? Well, if you look at pretty much all examples that are known in which there is some kind of helping behavior, in every case, if you look closely using the techniques we have now for identifying related individuals, you find that the individuals helping each other are family members. They're members of a SIB group or an extended family. So it seems to be in every case where we see this happening, these are family members helping each other and not unrelated individuals. So that's sort of indirect evidence that supports the idea that kin selection is responsible for favoring and maintaining that kind of helping behavior. Probably the best example in the marine environment of helping behavior is known in bottlenose dolphins, which form these male-male alliances. Okay. Um, okay, these alliances are well studied. There are several papers that describe them. So it's known that male bottlenose dolphins, Tursiops species, they cooperate together in pairs and in threes. So two or three males will get together and they will help each other and they will sequester and control the movements of females. It's called herding behavior. So males got together and preferentially herded non-pregnant females likely to be in estrus. And even when they were not herding females, the males were associated with each other, swam together. So when you see bottlenose dolphins swimming along together, often that's a group of males that are spending time together and cooperating with each other and helping each other out. And so there are different alliances of males. So different groups of males are swimming around, and those males will be aggressive towards other males that are not within their alliance. And they will defend females against other male alliances. So there's multiple level male alliances within a social group of bottlenose dolphins. So these alliances have been extensively studied down in Shark Bay, Australia. And here the researchers have put GPS um, receivers on the dolphins in these groups, and they found that there's several different alliances. You can see 15 or 20 different alliances that they've looked at here, and they've color coded them different colors. And these are groups of males from 3 on up to 14 males traveling together all along the coastline here. And they have, fairly well-defined territories that differ from each other. And this is basically their movements of these different alliances. And as the kin selection theory predicts, these males tend to be related to each other. So Kim Parsons and others have shown this. There's kinship as a basis for alliance formation among the male dolphins. This has been found in the Bahamas. So here's where you can look at mitochondrial DNA and compare it to males within alliances to males that are outside an alliance. So the dark indicates males that have the same mitochondrial DNA haplotype, and the white is male pairs that have different haplotypes. So within alliances, we tend to find virtually 100% of pairs have the same haplotype. But if you look at two males that are in different alliances, then the vast majority don't share the same mitochondrial haplotype. All right, so this is indirect evidence that you would predict if kin selection were the factor maintaining this helping behavior between males. However, things are a little bit more complicated than that. It's not quite that simple. In Australia, similar study was done and shown that the majority of male pairs within alliances were randomly related, although there was high relatedness among interacting alliances. So in this particular study, the findings indicate that mechanisms other than kin selection may be the most important in the development and maintenance of cooperation between male bottlenose dolphins. All right, so the situation, as usual, is more complicated. Nature is messy, and we have more work to do to figure out what's going on here in more detail. So with these alliances, there is evidence that of relatedness. There is a lot of evidence of relatedness going on between pairs within an alliance. But there's also some helping behavior between individuals that appear not to be related. So within these alliances, the males guard females, they cooperatively hunt, and they also compete against other alliances. So at present, the state of the art right now, we can say that kin selection seems to be likely to be involved to some extent. But it's not the only factor going on here, and there's other phenomena that we need to explain that don't seem to be easily explainable by kin selection. All right, so this is the Shark Bay study, which shows that there's no difference if you pair up males between alliances versus within alliances. There doesn't appear to be any difference in mitochondrial DNA haplotypes within and between. So that's a little bit of a blow to the kin selection theory. What about other examples? Well, participants seem to be related in crows with their alarm behavior, ground squirrels' alarm behavior. They're helping their family members. Belding's ground squirrel. Females give the alarm signal. Florida scrub jays often help their siblings and their parents. And of course, in eusocial species, everybody is the offspring of one female, and it's just basically the female's offspring foraging and maintaining this colony for the queen female. So you can think of this colony as an expression of fitness of the female that started it. And marine birds and mammals, the participants are often related, but it's still, in some cases, they're still questionable whether they're more related than you'd be expected by chance. So overall, the evidence pretty strongly favors kin selection theory. Relatedness among interacting individuals may facilitate evolution of altruistic behavior, which, even though it reduces the Darwinian fitness of the donor individual, it can increase the fitness of the allele causing altruism. But we're still left with a conflict because in many cases, altruism, or what appears to be altruism, occurs between individuals that are unrelated, like cooperative hunting behavior in dolphins and killer whales. Of course, altruism occurs all the time in human societies, or what looks like altruism, in which individuals donate their time or money into a cause that favors completely unrelated individuals. And there's many examples of that sort of behavior in non-human animals, especially whales, dolphins, porpoises, and primates. But the best marine examples are cooperative hunting in whales and dolphins. So here's a nice example of cooperative hunting in dolphins, another David Attenborough. So when there's 1,000 individuals, obviously there are many unrelated individuals involved in this school, in this cooperative hunting operation. Cooperative social behavior, obviously a single dolphin cannot accomplish this. The dolphins have to work together in teams, and they have to do so with some advanced planning, which requires intelligence. So how can we explain this behavior using, if not kin selection, then at least Darwinian selection on individuals, favoring individuals that have a higher fitness? So the question you can ask is, why aren't there cheater individuals among these cooperating dolphins? Cheater individuals just sort of hang around and allow the other dolphins to do all the work, and then come in when it's over and eat the herring themselves without having actually done the work. Those would be selfish individuals. Wouldn't their fitness be higher than the cooperating individuals? So you can think of two strategies here: cooperation or selfish cheating, just sort of hanging out, waiting for others to do the work. Which would have the higher fitness? Wouldn't the cheaters have the higher fitness? So isn't cooperation an unstable behavior? It can always be invaded and basically dismantled by, a few cheaters. Here's another example of cooperative hunting behavior in whales, and these are killer whales hunting gray whales. All right, this is another great, wonderful example of cooperative hunting in the marine environment. And in these cases, we've got like about a half a dozen killer whales, and probably in most cases, they're related to each other. They're family members or extended family members, brothers, sisters, maybe cousins. So there could definitely be some kin selection involved, promoting this kind of helping behavior. But it seems like it's more than just helping behavior, more than just kin selection going on here. Because this is very complicated cooperative behavior in which you have to plan ahead. This is a 6-hour hunt, so there's a lot of planning involved. And different individuals have to take on different tasks. So it's complicated, and there's certainly intelligence necessary to do this. Some individuals have to get in between the mother and her calf. Some individuals have to push the calf under to try and drown it. And some individuals have to actually go in for the kill. So there are different tasks and different behaviors that are necessary in cooperation among this group of individuals. And importantly, there are risks involved because the female, the mother gray whale, is about twice the size of the killer whale, so she could easily cause tremendous injury or death with a blow to one of these killer whales. So there's risks involved with this cooperation. So let's think about two different strategies, behavioral strategies of the killer whale. You could have one strategy would be to cooperate and engage in this risky behavior. Another strategy might be to just sort of swim alongside and avoid doing anything that's dangerous and just watch and then just wait for the whole operation to be done and then just go in uh, and enjoy the food as a result of the hunting operation. Even though you didn't do the work, you didn't take the risk, and you didn't make the effort. So we have two strategies, one the cooperation and the other is selfish strategy. Which one do you think would have the higher fitness? Wouldn't the selfish strategy have the higher fitness? If you're selfish, you can enjoy the benefits of that cooperative hunt, but not incur any of the risks. Wouldn't that give you the higher fitness? All right, if we just take a tour through most of our current knowledge on social behavior, we can think of all these different types of ways to be social. You could be 100% altruist, you could be 100% selfish, you could be selfish to non relatives, altruistic to relatives, you could be sometimes altruistic to non relatives, you could be dominant or submissive in your relationships. Those are all possible strategies, and we can ask, how does natural selection favor or disfavor any of those? And so 100% altruism is basically non-existent. You can't evolve altruistic behavior to non-relatives. 100% selfish behavior is very common um, in plants and invertebrates, especially. The strategy of being selfish to non-relatives, but altruistic to relatives, this is very common in vertebrates. Strategy of being sometimes altruistic to non-relatives, apparently. It occurs occasionally in vertebrates, especially primate species, and in the marine environment, we've got dolphins and whales, especially. Okay, so let's take a look at this phenomenon about altruism between what appears to be altruism between non-related individuals. So in marine species, got many marine mammals. You know, the examples we just showed of cooperative hunting in whales and dolphins. Many seabirds seem to be altruistic towards non-related individuals, which is something that needs to be explained. And apparently some fish, such as anemone fish. This is a fairly common phenomenon in which two female seabirds, such as Laysan albatrosses, will nest together. One female will lay eggs, and the two of them will help to brood and raise those eggs and offspring. So this represents a kind of altruistic behavior towards an unrelated individual, and this tends to evolve in cases where the sex ratio is skewed towards females. So if in this particular example, about 60% of individuals were females, and about 31% of the mated albatross pairs on Oahu were female-female. So this is an interesting phenomenon. Females will nest with each other. Obviously, the eggs came from somewhere. It came from a male at some point, but the male may have died, and so there was an extra females in the population, so they just paired up with each other. And so what fitness advantage would occur to that unrelated female that's helping raise the other female's eggs? Is there an advantage? And you can see in the female-female pairs, That's the white bars. They had a lower hatching rate of the eggs, but the fledging rate was about the same, and their overall reproductive success was about half of the black bars, which is the female male mating pairs. So they're a bit less successful, but better than nothing. Right, another example of cooperative behavior towards unrelated individuals, or altruistic behavior towards unrelated individuals, is in the clownfish or anemone fish. And in this in this case, in this study, remember this is a protandrous species. Individuals start out male, and then they change to female. And in this study, males were experimentally removed from 33 brooding pairs uh, in a population off of Japan. And 2/3 of those that were removed were replaced by foreign males before the eggs disappeared or hatched. So, and the replacement males then cared for those eggs that were left by the male that was removed. So that replacement male engaged in helping behavior of eggs that were completely unrelated to that male. So it helped brood these eggs that were not genetically related. And the female would headbutt the males, apparently to persuade him to undertake the egg care duty. All right, again, how does this apparently altruistic behavior evolve between two unrelated individuals? Okay, so the explanation seems to be this may not be true altruism, in which an individual really does suffer a loss in fitness, but we could call it reciprocal altruism. In other words, it's a form of cooperation, really. And how does reciprocal altruism evolve? Well, that's a difficult question. It's not easy. Selfish individuals should do better on average. And basically, to understand how reciprocal altruism should evolve, you have to take into account what's called game theory. Game theory is the quantification of selective costs and benefits between two interacting individuals in a social group where each one has a strategy that could change, and you need to adapt your strategy to the other person's strategy. And so the optimal strategy might be constantly changing depending on what the strategy of other individuals in the group are. So it gets complicated. So if an individual is helping because it expects something in return, in the future, how can it be sure that the helped individual will pay up? Immediate payoffs would make cooperation easier to evolve than long-term payoffs in the future, which require trust, memory, and intelligence. But in marine mammals, they're higher mammals, and their behavior is pretty amazing. So maybe they're capable of trust, memory, and intelligence. So the general problem is whether mammal A should cooperate with mammal B depends on what B's intentions are. B might be a selfish individual exploiting A and never intending to give anything back. Selfish individuals might have a higher fitness because they gain but never give back. So is it possible for cooperation or reciprocal altruism to evolve by natural selection? Another problem with evolution of cooperation or reciprocal altruism is that it is reciprocal. You need two to create the interaction and its benefits. So if you think about it, how does the very first reciprocal altruist gain anything? If it's the very first, then by definition, it's in a population filled with selfish individuals, individuals that are completely selfish towards non-relatives. So if this brand new single reciprocal altruist tries to share and give up its own fitness in hopes that it will get something in return, it will just be hammered by selfish individuals. In order for reciprocal altruism to work, there have to be at least two reciprocal altruists in the population, and they have to find each other. How then can the trait ever increase in frequency? So here's our population of selfish individuals before reciprocal altruism or cooperation evolves. And you've got one altruist coming in. It can't gain at all unless it interacts with the second one. They need to find each other and interact and cooperate, and then increase each other's fitness, and then increase each other's representation in the population. And then over time, eventually, the selfish population is converted into reciprocal altruists. So basically, just for this thing to work, these two altruists have to find each other and interact. And how does that happen if there's if you start out with just one? Just one individual has to find a way to convert a selfish individual into another reciprocal altruist somehow. One possibility that would make it easier for two new reciprocal altruists who originated through some random mutation, genetic mutation from selfish ancestors, for these to find each other is what's called the tit for tat strategy. And this strategy was named for a strategy in a computer tournament that was organized by Axelrod in 1984, the famous tournament. So the strategy that won in this tournament was the tit for tat strategy. And this strategy is sort of a combination of reciprocal altruism and reciprocal selfish behavior. If an individual was sharing the last time you interacted, remember that and share that with that individual the next time you interact. So the second part of the strategy was if an individual was selfish the first time you interacted, then remember that selfish individual, and be selfish in return the next time you interact with that same individual. This is called the tit for tat strategy. You remember the people that you interact with, and you pay back according to how they treated you. That's the tit for tat strategy. So in the computer tournament, this strategy is the one that had the highest fitness. So a completely selfish strategy did not win out, and a completely altruistic strategy also did not win out. The only strategy that won out in this competition was the tit for tat, which is basically the pay as you received strategy, payback as you received it last time strategy. So why was the tit for tat strategy the highest fitness? Well, first of all, it prevented getting hammered by selfish individuals. That was easy because if you get hammered only once per individual you interact with and you learn your lesson, then the next time you interact with that same individual, you no longer behave altruistically, you no longer share, you no longer cooperate. So the tit for tat strategy reduces greatly the potential for a number of negative interactions that a reciprocal altruist must put up with before it just by chance finds another rare reciprocal altruist and then interacts and identifies it as another reciprocal altruist, and then both enjoy the benefits of their cooperation. So the form of reciprocal altruism is the tit for tat strategy. These individuals can find each other more quickly and with less fitness loss along the way. When they do eventually find each other, they enjoy the fitness benefits of cooperation, and so have a higher fitness than the selfish individuals that dominate the population. So they can compete favorably for resources against those selfish individuals by cooperating. They'll leave more offspring than the selfish individuals, pass on the trait of cooperation, and eventually the trait will spread through the population and eliminate the unconditionally selfish strategy. So that's the idea. And does it work? Well, the idea sounds good in theory, and it's hard to test in practice, but was tested in this computer competition that in which Axelrod wrote a computer simulation of a population of interacting animals, each of which could have a different social interaction strategy. And the question was, what strategy has the highest fitness and eventually dominates? And so in this competition, 62 scientists were allowed to submit the strategy that they thought would win, their favorite strategy, and that strategy competed in a round robin tournament, and that's was written up as a book called The Evolution of Cooperation by Axelrod. And the winner in that competition turned out to be the tit for tat strategy. It won against all other 61 strategies, which combined, various degrees of selfishness and sharing. So the tit for tat was the winning strategy and this was the strategy that was submitted by this particular scientist, Anatole Rappaport. And it won for two reasons. Number one, it was retaliatory. Um, it discouraged selfish opponents from persisting and from suffering from future interactions um, with the same selfish individual. And the second reason that it's forgiving, after just one positive interaction, it treated the individual positively next time, which helped restore cooperation and the benefits from it. And the study of the evolution of social interaction strategies is called game theory, which is a branch of mathematics invented by John Maynard Smith. And he wrote this nice book that summarized the different strategies and different types of games. So if you're interested in this subject, it's worth checking out. Game theory is difficult because the fitness of an individual as it interacts socially with other individuals in the population, that fitness depends on the frequency of all strategies in the population, and these will undoubtedly change over time. So there could be many, basically an unlimited number of social strategies, and their fitness is difficult to calculate. You have to take into account, all the possible interactions. And probably a straight tit for tat strategy is rare in nature. Um, Probably modified forms of tit for tat are common, probably, and probably as in most primates, and possibly also whales and dolphins. And a modified form, for example, in which individuals vary how sharing they are depending on the social status or sex or age of other individuals and their chances of getting caught being selfish, for example, stealing or hoarding food. But a tit for tat strategy can work only in groups that are fairly permanent so that individuals recognize and know each other from previous interactions. So they know who the cheaters are, with who they treat accordingly or punish accordingly, and who the fair players are with whom they can share. And so this condition of fairly permanent groups, that's met in many animal groups, including cetaceans, whales, and dolphins. Um, these groups are intelligent and can recognize individuals. Individual dolphins, for example, have signature whistles that identify them, for example. So it's likely that in these cooperative hunting cases, individuals remember each other and remember how they behaved in past instances of helping, and therefore are capable of reciprocating based on that identification and their memory. So in these male-male alliances, there's probably social enforcement going on. Individuals who are not cooperative can be booted from the alliance, and individuals that are cooperative are rewarded in the alliance, even if they're not related. So you don't necessarily have to have related individuals here. You just have to have individuals that um, use some kind of tit for tat strategy. And if they do, then this cooperation can evolve to be stable and benefit the cooperating individuals. And of course, something similar happens in the cooperative hunting that we saw in bottlenose dolphin, the common dolphin, other species as well, and also the cooperative hunting we saw in the killer whales. If there's a cheater, a selfish individual that does not do a share of the work, and these animals are intelligent and have a good memory, they will recognize the cheaters, remember them, and enforce the rules on those cheaters, and those cheaters will not benefit from the cooperative hunt. So that's a possibility, how we can explain the evolution of cooperative hunting. First, you have to have a semi permanent group of intelligent individuals who can recognize each other and remember each other, and they engage in some sort of a tit for tat behavior, a rewarding behavior if other individuals are cooperative, then a punishing behavior if not. And that way, the cooperative individuals will find each other, interact, and stay together and form this stable unit, which can compete favorably against other groups that may not be as cooperative. So, this model might be how these male male alliances in dolphins evolve and have evolved and become quite stable, is that the individuals are enforcing each other's cooperation within these groups through some kind of a tit for tat social strategy. So we can get various types of cooperation, first order, second order, and third order cooperation as the groups get bigger and bigger, that can be stable and held together by some kind of a tit for tat strategy. And these alliances can last over 10 years. And again, there are probably many variations on some kind of a tit for tat strategy in nature. For example, you could have a family first strategy, be 100% selfish to non relatives, be altruistic to relatives according to Hamilton's rule. That might be one strategy. There's the tit for tat, repay in kind to non relatives um, based on your last interaction with no exceptions. You'd have a modified tit for tat strategy, repay in kind, depending on sex, age, social status, chance of getting caught, price of getting caught, etc. So there are all sorts of possibilities, but a long term, stable, cooperative society seems to require some kind of a basic tit for tat strategy in which you remember and repay individuals based on their past behavior during past interactions. And this sort of strategy can only involve in fairly intelligent, cognitively capable species who are capable of recognizing individuals and remembering how those individuals behaved in the past. All right, so today we talked about behavioral ecology, starting out with how natural selection shapes behavior towards potential mates in the mating system, and then finishing with how natural selection should favor behavior towards non-mates and whether those non-mates are related or unrelated. And we came up with the idea of kin selection, which can actually favor the evolution of altruism, in which individuals receive a real loss in fitness due to their altruistic behavior, but that can evolve only through kin selection if that altruistic behavior is directed towards relatives that are sufficiently closely related relative to the cost and benefits. Then we looked at altruism towards unrelated individuals and explained that as not real altruism, not true altruism, but rather cooperation or reciprocal altruism, in which you actually get a benefit from that, maybe later on. And that benefit is can result from a social strategy called tit for tat, in which individuals repay other individuals based on their memory of how that individual interacted with them the most recent time that they interacted. So that's called the tit for tat strategy, which seems to be a strategy that favors the evolution of cooperative group behavior in animals that are intelligent enough to actually use that strategy. All right, that's it for this week. Have a great rest of the day. We'll see you next time.